Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. I'm far from the only one to point out that South Africa is an interesting test case internationally because, in many ways, it has done a speed run of the ideology that has otherwise infected many Western governments. Now, obviously, South Africa has a very different political dynamic that is all its own. But by observing what's going on there, we can really understand some of the implications of what has been happening in the larger West. And Donald Trump this week spoke up about what is happening. Recently, an expropriations bill has been passed in South Africa that would make it easier for the government to reapportion land from those that own it, especially on a race conscious based system. And so discussing that with me today is Ernst van Zyl. He's been on the podcast a number of times. He is the public relations manager for the human rights organization AfriForum. Thank you for joining me, man.
Hey, Auron, nice to be back, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Some fascinating stuff to unpack.
Yeah, it's always great to speak with you. Obviously, you're at the tip of the spear. You are involved in an activist organization fighting in South Africa, and you're very aware of the different events on the ground. So while we get little snippets, little bursts of what may or may not be happening in South Africa, it's good to discuss directly because I've already seen a number of Western outlets twisting, shaping, trying to, especially now that Donald Trump has spoken out and brought attention to this, give what's happening in South Africa a different shade. And so I want you to go ahead and maybe just lay out for the basics for people. What is this bill that has been passed in South Africa?
Right, so there's a fascinating timeline, actually a detailed timeline, but I'll give you the cliff notes for the sake of time. So it's the first important date I think to mention is 2018. So what happens in 2018? In 2018, the ANC announces that they are pushing to amend the constitution, specifically Section 25 of the South African Constitution, the property rights clause, to enable expropriation without compensation. For those that maybe don't know the lingo, expropriation without compensation just means the government can take your property without paying you a cent. And what happens in 2018 is the process gets started to amend the Constitution, to pretty much abolish the private property rights clause within the Constitution. These types of processes take a while, so it only concludes by 2021, where the government then it goes to a final vote in Parliament and it fails. And the reason why it fails is a very big plot twist. It actually is quite funny. So what happened was you need 2/3 majority within Parliament to pass a constitutional amendment. The ANC had about 57%, and their allies, the far left parties within the Parliament, yes, the ANC is a leftist party, but you can go even more far left than the ANC. They and their left-wing, far left allies were able to cobble together an alliance that's more than 2/3 of the parliament. But that alliance crumbled and they didn't get the 2/3 support because the far left thought that they're not going to vote to approve this constitutional amendment because they don't think it goes far enough, and they think they've got enough support. If they push the government, they can actually make it go even farther. So what happens is, oh, excuse me, I'm just I see there's a alarm going off here. Just give me one moment.
No problem. Well, while he checks on that, hopefully everything's all right. But as Ernst was laying out, there has been a long road to this. We've had this discussion or discussion around this topic a number of times. And so this is just the final step in a process that has been ongoing for a long time. Everything okay?
Yeah, 100%. It was just a false alarm here. So what then happens is, in a strange twist of fate, private property rights in South Africa are saved by left-wing hubris. They bite off more than they can chew. They think we can take this even farther. We're not going to accept the abolishment of private property rights. We want all property to be in the custodianship of the state. So they push the ANC and say, we're not going to vote with you for this constitutional amendment. And that opportunity fails, and property rights are safe for the time being. At the time, AfriForum warns and says, well, you guys have to understand, I know there's a lot of celebration now, private property rights have been saved, but these guys are going to come back. They're going to try again to amend they're going to try again to make expropriation without compensation possible. And we are proven right just a few days later when the then Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, comes out, talks to the media and says, the first attempt to make expropriation without compensation possible has now failed. We will now move on to alternative ways to make it possible. One of these ways will be through the pushing through of legislation to make it possible. The legislation that he's talking about here is the Expropriation Bill, which now has been turned into the Expropriation Act in 2025. The next point on that timeline that's very important is about 2022, where the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, is giving an address to his ANC supporters, and he says the purpose of the Expropriation Act is to make sure that, or to ensure that we can expropriate property with zero or nil compensation. 2020, fast forward to about 2024, Deputy President Paul Mashatile says the same thing. He's asked about the terminology within the expropriation bill, about it says null expropriate. It allows expropriation with null compensation, but not expropriation without compensation. And he says, well, we as the ANC understand null compensation to mean no compensation. So the goal of this bill is to enable expropriation without compensation. And then just to tie it all together, the little bow on top, why am I underlining this null compensation, no compensation point? Because that's been the main angle of attack since Trump's post. Because now Trump says, well, expropriation without compensation is going to happen in South Africa. And now the ANC and all the entire PR and propaganda industrial complex have been mobilized to say, well, it's not expropriation without compensation. It's expropriation with null compensation. It's not the same thing, in quotation marks. It is the same thing. Null just means it's a synonym for no. Null means zero. It's a very cheap language game that they're trying, and not only a lot of people are falling for it. Some international outlets seem to be falling for it. But I mean, that's why I mentioned those key quotes from the deputy president, from the president, and from the former Minister of Justice, because they made it very explicitly clear two very important things. Firstly, the difference between null compensation and no compensation. There's no difference in the mind of the ANC. It means the same to them. And secondly, the explicit goal of the Expropriation Act is to enable expropriation without compensation. So now they're trying to rewrite history and change the narrative, but the internet never forgets. All of these things are there for the seeing. You can go find them. You don't have to go dig through the archives.
Yeah, this is a very strange thing I noticed when researching this through Western media. When I was looking at this, the first thing is just anything called an Expropriations Act should be scary, right? Like the name itself implies we are going to be taking your property by force, and that's never great. Now, in the United States, we have eminent domain, and that requires just compensation if the government needs something for a project. But even that, which is technically in the Constitution and the Fifth Amendment, is abused regularly by governments, and people are very worried, even with those very strict protections inside the Constitution, that process is being abused on behalf of developers and others who are cozy with the government and want to eminent domain your property in order so they can, they have to pay you for it, but you are compelled to give up property you don't want to give up, even with compensation, and that is considered an abuse of the power. So already, even with compensation, we're already talking about a power that is rife for abuse, no matter what kind of financial restitution is made. And then when you look in the Western media, whenever I see this discussed, as you point out, they say, oh, well, with compensation. But as you're pointing out here, that's just not the case. Like this is clearly not what the intention is, even if they're trying to fudge around with the language a little bit. And I know they hate Trump. I get that that's like part of the thing, but are they really expecting to cover for what is functionally communist theft of land by just saying, well, they might throw them a few, dollars or something at the end of the day?
I mean, that's the thing about South Africa is it is already the current legislation already before the Expropriation Act already allows for expropriation with compensation. It's such a key nuance, but everyone is either willingly or unwittingly just ignoring that fact. They're saying, well, everyone has expropriation laws. What are you talking about? But the key thing is it's expropriation without compensation. And as I said, the other more sneaky approach is to say, well, it's not because expropriation without compensation is a very scary term in South Africa, because that's exactly the terminology that ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe used. They used the term expropriation without compensation. So that's why they're talking about expropriation with nil compensation in this act, to try and defang it a little bit so it doesn't sound as scary. Unfortunately for them, it doesn't seem to be working. Everyone understands that if your boss tells you, I'm going to pay you nil salary this year, you're not going to be very happy about it. So that's what's going on here. And as I said, the ANC might be a weakened party, but they still have a very powerful PR and propaganda industrial complex machine out there. And that machine kicked into high gear this week. I mean, we saw that happening, and it's targeting my organization, AfriForum, and any other organization or individual that's standing up and saying, but you guys have been saying for the past 5 years that you are absolutely going to expropriate private property, and you want expropriation without compensation, and this bill is how you're going to achieve it. We've connected all the dots. We believe you when you say that, but now suddenly everything has changed.
Yeah, there's a name for work with null compensation. It's called slavery, right? that's the terminology here. And what we're talking about is really, the theft of land by the government on a regular basis without having any need to compensate the person, pay them back in any way for what's been stolen from them. Again, there's a word for that. It's called communism, where the government can take from everyone according to what they have and redistribute it in the way that they see fit. Now, the kind of subtext behind this is that this isn't just communism, though, as you've pointed out when you've been on the show many times, many of these South African parties have deep ties to communism, often will explicitly praise it or be adjacent
just
to
a
it.
quick detail there. In South Africa, the ANC is actually a tripartite alliance. So the ANC is part of this alliance of 3 different parties. One of them competes in elections, the ANC. The other 2, just like parasitically, are tied to it, but they don't really compete in elections, but they do influence policy. I mean, they influence the ANC. Their members get appointed as ministers and within the state apparatus. And that tripartite alliance are the 3 parties: the ANC, the African National Congress, COSATU, which is all the labor unions in South Africa, and the SACP. What is the SACP? The South African Communist Party. That's why when you Google President Cyril Ramaphosa South African Communist Party or President Cyril Ramaphosa SACP, you get photographs of him doing speeches in front of like a backdrop of hammer and sickles that look like it's been photoshopped, but it's real. So just wanted to underline your point there. I mean, communism, it's not something that you have to go down a rabbit hole to find in South Africa. It's quite in the open.
Yeah, and on top of that, like I was saying, the reason that there's such a charged atmosphere around this expropriation, it would be terrible no matter what. It would the implications of this kind of communist government would be terrible no matter what. But specifically in the case of South Africa, and unfortunately, for a large part across the globe, the communism is also paired with a racial bias, right? This is race communism. And this is a lot of what is going unsaid by the media when it comes to expropriation. Expropriating from whom? For what cause? Redistributing to whom? Why, right? So for people who don't know, is the expropriation just going to be random? Are they just choosing people off the street? Is it only rich people? All the rich people are losing their property? Or is there a specific target for this expropriation?
Well, to answer that question, all we really have to go on is the rhetoric of the ANC itself. So what is the rhetoric around expropriation without compensation? Well, in South Africa, it has like an official title with capital letters. It's called the land debate, almost like the sacred thing that you take part in, where they literally call it the original sin of land theft by evil white people in the past, and that original sin needs to be rectified by almost literally a divine intervention, which would be expropriation without compensation, redistribution of land. And that's how they talk about these issues. So when you ask the question of what are their intentions in regards to who's going to be targeted, well, if your entire rhetoric, everything you say around property and land revolves around the narrative that whites own 150% of land or 1,000% of land, then if you're making those types of claims, it's very clear that if anyone's going to be expropriated from to redistribute to fix a problem, the problem being this original sin of land theft in the past, then by default, the people that are going to be dispossessed have to be Afrikaners and white South Africans. Otherwise, you're not going to achieve your divine end of perfect equality in regards to land ownership and property ownership in South Africa. And why I'm so exaggerating when it comes to the statistics that I'm mentioning is the ANC literally talk like that. Now, they don't really use terminology like 150% of land, but they say things like white people, the 5% minority, own 70% of the land or 80% of the land in South Africa. You've probably seen that statistic. In very Soviet-esque fashion, they do these studies and these audits, and they do their little ideological science, their National Democratic Revolution science in the background, and then their prophets come forward and say, we have determined through our research that white people own this amount of land and property in South Africa. But they can't explain how. The research is worth less than the paper it's written on. It's literally based on vibes. It's literally based on, well, we looked at these statistics and we tortured the statistics a little bit, and then it screamed out this answer. That's how they go about it. But to wrap it up, I mean, that's to give you any hint about what they intend. If the entire conversation around land ownership in the country revolves around this grand religious narrative of white people own all the land and it's because it was stolen in the past and we need to rectify it, who do you think is going to be targeted? There's only one logical conclusion. Otherwise, the sums don't add up. If the red team owns all of the resources, the only way to redistribute the resources is to explicitly depossess or to confiscate from the red team. Anything else would not achieve anything even close to redistribution.
So we're talking about a country in which a song about killing the Boer is sung, from
beautiful metaphorical song, nothing literal about it.
Yeah, no, can't actually draw any conclusions from this. But no. Yeah, this genocidal statement is sung, from political stages in South Africa, and even if they're not saying explicitly in the legislation, hey, this is going to target Afrikaners or white South Africans, as you point out, the rhetoric attached to everything else they're doing makes
There's only one conclusion if you based on the rhetoric. Yes,
right, and so that creates a scenario where they're winking to the international community. Well, this is just about equity. We're just making sure everyone has opportunity. These kind of things. But internally, the politics are very clear as kind of where the shoe is going to drop. My question for you would be, what percentage of South Africa is white, and of that, what percentage is Afrikaner?
So in South Africa, there's about 4 and unfortunately, this is a bit outdated, these statistics, because like a lot of other things that the government does, the census is not up there with one of the world-class pieces of research that the government conducts. I mean, we had a new census in 2022, I think, that is not cited by anyone because it was just one massive disaster. It's unusable, so bad it was conducted. So I'll have to go on the 2011 numbers. But I'll adjust them a little bit based on just my gut feeling where they are at the moment. So the white population in South Africa is in the range of about 4.5 million, between 4.5 and 5 million, and about between 2.7 and 3 million of that are Afrikaners. So about 5% of the population are white, and about 2.5% or about 2.7% around there of that minority are the Afrikaners. So the Afrikaners are a majority within the white minority, and the white minority is about 5% of the population.
Now, as you pointed out, South Africa is not the only African nation to have gone through this process to
Mm.
face many of these issues. And Zimbabwe famously has had a great difficulty in getting its agriculture going and providing for its food-based needs, since it made sure that white, farmers basically weren't working the land anymore, weren't in possession of the land. Does any of that reflect in the way that the South African government treats this issue? I mean, you've seen this movie play out before. You know
Mm.
where it goes. Is it just a simple they're so corrupt that they're going to offer this even if it starves their people, or what is the motivation behind this, given the
Mm.
context in which this has already happened in other nations?
Hmm. So there's two very important details here. The first detail is that the ANC have no. It's no secret that the ANC praise and hail Robert Mugabe as a hero, as a revolutionary hero, a hero of the revolution, and it's not an idealized version of Mugabe, as in, well, none of the land grabs and the atrocities happened. It's not an idealism based on denial. It is an idealism based on, yes, all of that happened, and it's a good thing. That's the type of idealism you see from the ANC. It's not a denial of no atrocities were committed, no land was not confiscated in Zimbabwe. No, it is, yes, land was confiscated in Zimbabwe. Yes, expropriation without compensation happened in South Africa, and Robert Mugabe is a hero. That's their stance, which again just destroys any form of trust that anyone will have in them when they try to assure people in 2025. No, we deeply value the constitutional rights of private property, while at the same time hailing Robert Mugabe, a tyrant that plunged his country into chaos due to expropriation without compensation, while at the same time hailing him as a hero. The second aspect to that answer is the fact that when it comes to particularly what is driving the ANC, my colleague Barend Ace actually summed it up very nicely. He said about a week ago, in his words, and I quote, I think people are underestimating how far the ANC are willing to go to hold on to power. They are willing to burn down the country in order to rule over the ashes. And I mean, that's literally what the ANC, from what I can see, are willing to do based on the policies that they're pushing through. They're not pushing through these policies based out of in some like deep ideological principle, even if it's in a leftist sense, ideological vision of we will bring about a utopia through these policies. No, they're doing it out of a very, very cynical push of we need to do anything possible to hang on to power. I mean, it's no coincidence that they pushed through this bill after they dropped to 40% below 50%. So South Africa has been a one-party state for 29 years. And then in 2024, in our elections, the ANC dropped to 40% and they went into coalition with a bunch of former opposition parties. But they're still ruling as if they're a 50-plus party. So it doesn't really matter. It's just a little, at the moment, it's just an aesthetic. It's just based on vibes. It's literally called the Government of National Unity. But the Government of National Unity is passing the most extreme policies that we've ever seen in post-1994 South Africa. But it's the vibes are positive. So just to finish up there, I mean, that's what's driving the ANC. It's a party that idealizes Robert Mugabe, and it's a party that's willing to hold on to power no matter what, even if it ruins millions of lives.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but South Africa was a nation with a space program at some point, right?
And with nuclear weapons that we developed ourselves, yes.
Yeah. So
and dismantled. I think South Africa has the title of the only country in the world that developed nuclear weapons and dismantled them.
You've got to. I would say it's a wonder that you would look at a country that was that advanced and decided to go from a functional space program and a nuclear program to not even being able to operate a electrical grid, and possibly driving themselves to the point where they might not be able to feed themselves due to kind of this kind of ethnic hatred built around land use. But at the same time, I'm living in the United States, and we were going the same direction but slower. So I guess I can't be too stunned. I mean, I hope ultimately that the arrival of Donald Trump and his desire to dismantle a large amount of the programs that have been pushing the United States that direction changes what's happening here. Obviously, Trump posting about South Africa brought a lot of attention to what is going on there now. You've been on the show many times, kind of telling us about this journey, warning that this final step would come. But here we are, and Trump is announcing it in a way that makes it, many people across the globe aware of what's going on. What do you think about Trump making that statement, and what has been the fallout? Has that brought international awareness? Has that just made everybody in the country, double down? Increase the pressure on Afroforum? What has been the fallout of Trump getting involved?
Well, that's the meat and potatoes of the conversation. I mean, well, firstly, Russell Lamberti, my good friend and economist here in South Africa, sums it up. He says South Africa is the leading de-developing country in the world. I mean, we're going backwards in a lot of senses. I mean, we had a functioning rail network. The other day, me and my wife were driving down from the capital, Pretoria, to Cape Town, and we saw a freight train, a functional freight train, and we both reacted like we saw a cryptid, like we saw Bigfoot. We both shouted out, "Look, a working train!" And it it just is a symptom of what's happening around us. So, what's been the fallout? Well, firstly, I think what needs to be understood is two things. One, the ANC and the government of South Africa is in total panic stations. The one thing that they're not very good at, well, there's many things that they're not very good at, but the one thing that they're particularly bad at is having a poker face in the face of crisis. So the ANC are clearly panicking. They're trying to hide it, but nobody's falling for it. They're lashing out. They're looking for scapegoats. They're attacking left and right, screaming about misinformation, screaming about words like treason and betrayal, and Donald Trump is X, Y, and Z, all the bad words under the sun. And I mean, my organization, AfriForum, the ANC put out an official press statement attacking my organization, AfriForum, for spreading disinformation that has now led to this, ignoring the fact that it's their radical policies and pushing of extremist policies and attempts to abolish private property rights that brought this on them. AfriForum just told the world, can you guys put one eye on South Africa? Just come have a little look. We have something to show you. Just come check here. That's all we did. We kind of hold up a mirror to the ANC and we told the world, come look for yourself. Don't believe what we say. Come see what we say. Come look for yourself. Do research. Come see. Have a look. And that's the one aspect, is the ANC are in complete panic stations. They're lashing out. They're putting out press statements, attacking civil society organizations like AfriForum, screaming about misinformation, never saying what the misinformation is, never saying how they know we're spreading misinformation, as if, if they have such intimate knowledge about what we're telling people in the Trump administration, then they're going to have to admit that probably they have, do they bug our meetings? Do they listen in on our phones? How do they know? How do they have the secret knowledge? But that's the one aspect. The other aspect, which I think a lot of analysts are missing, is, yes, on the one side, the big damage to the ANC and the South African government is the retraction of funding and the threat of future funding. That's the other thing that's critical to understand. Yes, Donald Trump has announced that he's cutting off aid, but he's cut off aid to many other countries. What I see, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm seeing in what Trump is doing here is he's threatening escalating cutting off of aid. For example, ending trade agreements like AGOA that are based pretty much agricultural trade agreements based on private property rights being protected and respected, and cutting off other forms of funding as well and other agreements as well. I don't see this as Trump saying, well, we've cut off aid all across the world and in your country for special reasons. I think the aid being cut off is something separate to much broader cutting off of aid and punishment coming South Africa's way, which is worrying, because at the same time, AfriForum does not want to see the citizens of South Africa punished. We want to see the corrupt politicians and extremists within the government punished. But the other aspect here that a lot of analysts are missing is that, yes, there's that one aid aspect, the aid that's been cancelled, and the threat of future funding that the ANC and the South African government is worried about. But I would go as far as to say that the majority of the fuel that is fueling this outraged response, this panicked response, is not necessarily a financial drive. It is rooted in a phenomenon that some people are missing. It's the phenomenon or the fact that the ANC have no immune system against international criticism. For the first 20 plus years of their reign in South Africa, they were the golden boys of the world. They could do no wrong. They were untouchable. They were pretty much the party of the progressive paragon of the 21st century, and everyone was saying how they want to emulate the ANC, the party of Nelson Mandela. They were pretty much called the role model party, and there's literally nothing wrong that they can do. And that's the environment within which the ANC pretty much got used to for the past 25 plus years. Only recently did they burn through that almost infinite mountain of international goodwill. I think they believe that mountain was infinite. I think they believe their international goodwill could never run out. If I was in their position, if I looked at how I was treated by the rest of the world, I would also start believing that my international goodwill has no limit. But it did have a limit, and they burned through that goodwill in the past 5, 6, 7 years at a breakneck speed, to the point where now it is running out, and they don't know how to react. They don't know how to function in an international setting, in an international environment where they can actually be criticized, where they can actually be attacked, where they can actually be told, what you're doing here is wrong. We don't agree with what you're doing here. What you're doing there is destructive or extremist. And that's why I think the main drive behind their reaction is particularly from that point. It's like a child that grew up only with compliments. He's never experienced any negative word in his life. And then in his 20s or in his 30s, he gets the first real piece of substantial criticism in his life, and he just shatters and he doesn't know how to react. That's what's happening with the ANC at the moment from a Trump post.
Yeah, that's a really interesting dynamic to bring up because, of course, as you point out, post-apartheid, which is the most evil thing that has ever happened to a human being in the existence of mankind, there was this idea that any government that follows it has to be blessed somehow, right? It's got this dispensation to just rule in the name of progressive enlightenment, and it's going to set all these wrongs right, and it's going to bring everyone onto equal footing, and the magic wand has been waved over this once racist state, and that's going to kind of solve all of these issues. And so when you're in this environment, when you're kind of inheriting this post-apartheid politics in a global liberal order, you're going to be the golden boy. You're going to, like you said, you're just going to receive nothing but compliments. You're never going to have any discipline. All the gates of, probably international financing and other things are open to you because they want to see the project succeed. And you're the one who's supposed to bring about the right of these wrongs. But then when you see that the performance is poor, that the corruption is high, that the abuses are real, maybe that takes a little bit of the shine off the apple, but you've still got the backing of most of the global liberal order. They're still kind of on your side. But as you point out now, yes, Trump has said there's no aid to be had there. The international aid is not just for South Africa, but many different countries. But the fact that there could be consequences, right? He's throwing around the idea of tariffs and trade relationships.
No, he's saying an investigation has begun, and an investigation implies that whatever that investigation finds could either be aggravating or be lessening on the consequences.
Right. And so you have the scenario where not only would there be consequences from the United States and, Trump is evil and all those things, so maybe you can play it off that way. But more importantly, you can feel the global liberal order weakening overall, right? We didn't have it to the same extent in here in America, but very clearly over the last 10 years, progressives who were very firmly in control of the institutions of the United States basically ran through all of their goodwill as well, right? They burned down all of their credentialism and all of their moral superiority just so they could lock people in their homes and, steal a bunch of their stuff and punish their political enemies, throw them in jail. Hit them with all these false charges. And so it's kind of a terrible time for the ANC to kind of double down on this because they, as you say, they're kind of taking for granted this goodwill that they don't have. They're assuming this immunity that came from the global liberal order, just as that liberal order is kind of starting to fall apart. And so it seems like they're betting on a large stock of funds and goodwill that simply don't exist, and they're going to continue to play as if they have those cards in their hand to their own destruction.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The best metaphor for that is the ANC is a nail, and they're being asked to screw in a screw. They can't do it. All they can do is try to just hammer the screw in. But as any carpenter will tell you, that's a terrible idea. There's a quote by a South African investigative journalist that I actually have a lot of respect for. Yes, they do exist here in South Africa still. James Myburgh. He's the editor of Politics Web, a fantastic publication here in South Africa. And he summed it up so brilliantly this week. In his quote, he said that, and I quote, "The Trump administration's efforts to pressure the South African government to close the door that the Expropriation Act is trying to open represents the first time in living memory that the leader of a Western democracy has sought to check the ANC's kleptocracism as it enters its final and most ruinous phase, rather than excuse, enable, or profit from it. Given this history, the apoplexy that this has provoked among sections of our commentariat with cries of lies and treason is truly a breathtaking sight to behold," end quote. And I think that sums it up perfectly.
So people who have watched this channel before have seen you talk about this, but just in case it's someone's first time hearing about what's going on in South Africa or learning about Afroforum, can you explain just real quick what Afroforum is and why it would be the target of the ANC in a moment like this?
So Afroforum is a community-based solutions organization in South Africa that also has a human rights or a constitutional rights element to it when it comes to protecting particularly the rights of minority groups and especially Afrikaners and Afrikaans speakers in South Africa. And it's a community, but we have a strategy that is two-pronged. So we call it the fight and build strategy. So on the one side, the fight side, we do lawfare, we do court cases, we do international pressure, we do political pressure. But on the other side is the build side. The build side, you see throughout what we call the solidarity movement. So Afroforum is just one node within what we call the solidarity movement, which is a network of 50 plus Afrikaner organizations that each specialize in a particular field. So there's a long list. You have, for example, Soltech, which is a technical college that we built. There's Solidariteit, which is the Christian labor union. There's Solidariteit Helpende Hand, which is our welfare organization. There is our Canton, our private construction company and property development company, and the list goes on. But when it comes to particularly what Afroforum does, as I said, we have the fight side, but the build side is we mobilize communities to become what we call state-proof. We, through any type of form of taking back responsibility, and that was so refreshing to read in your book that you come to the same conclusion that the only way to fight the total state is to start taking back more responsibilities, the responsibilities that we've given up over the years, over the decades, over centuries, to the total state. The only way to fight back effectively is to take up those responsibilities again. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. You're going to have to give up a lot of luxuries, a lot of free time, but in the end, it's worth it. But that's exactly what Afroforum is doing, not in theory, in practice. So we have, for example, we're pioneering a private firefighting unit at the moment, which has been very successful. We just started it last year, and we're already planning on rolling it out to other cities. We have a massive security network all across the country of 175 plus neighborhood watches. And these aren't your grandma's neighborhood watch with pepper spray and a little logbook to write down crimes in. These are well-trained and well-equipped community members that are organizing to make their communities safe because the government is failing to make their communities safe. Then we also have solutions in the field of water, in electricity, and it's still early days in regards to what we can do, but we're making major progress there. We're putting an increased amount of resources, particularly into water, seeing as the water system, the water infrastructure in South Africa is crumbling. So in regards to, I mean, we can get into how we're going to be challenging the Expropriation Act as well. But in short, what we do is the government has in South Africa is, as Russell Lamberti says, the world's leading is in charge of the world's leading de-developing country. And de-development means that the state's capacity is constantly degrading, and it's creating this massive vacuum. And that vacuum can only be filled by one of two factions, either the good guys or the bad guys. The bad guys are organized crime. The good guys are communities and your own institutions and organizations. That's why South Africa, because we have this big void, is a playground and a great case study of both the good guys and the bad guys in that binary. South Africa has amazing success stories of state-proof solutions, but also has some of the most sophisticated, advanced, organized crime networks in the world. We have a mafia for every sector in South Africa. We have a construction mafia, a mining mafia. We have a mafia. We have a mafia within every single sector in the country. Organized crime has infiltrated. We have a water mafia in South Africa. So that's the context within where AfriForum is fighting back, but we're achieving major success, and I'm very proud to be part of it.
Yeah, that's an important reminder that when people want less of the state, they have to remember that if they don't fill the void, as you say, if the good guys don't fill the void, then the bad guys will, right? The state doesn't just disappear and then everything, the perfect individual just begins to do their work and live their life in kind of this libertarian utopia. What happens is people organize, and either the good guys organize, the communities organize, and they work for the good of the people in the area in which they live, or the bad guys organize and they become parasitic. But something is going to get organized, and someone's going to control an area. And so those that wish for the state to be rolled back, that they want to see less of a total state, obviously South Africa is getting it in a less than ideal way. It's not a voluntary option that the state is simply so incompetent and so corrupt that its ability to project power collapses, and these other organizations, good and bad, fill the void. But many who would like to see it voluntarily occur need to remember the same thing, that the responsibilities that you're talking about, the organization that you're talking about, is incumbent on any people that would like to take back that power. And so it's not enough to simply say, I want smaller government, I want an end to these giant states. You must become virtuous. You must take on responsibility. You must organize. You must fill your time with the things that once created and maintained civilization, because you no longer have this giant state doing it for you. And when your state is a rather evil one, in the case that unfortunately that South Africa is currently facing, that could be good in some areas, but if they're going to turn their powers against you, that's something that you have to watch out for. And that was going to be my next question. Given the reality of this bill, what actions do you expect from the South African government, and what are the responses that AfriForum is planning to fight against it?
So firstly, I think, and this is still speculative, I do think this post and action by Trump is going to have a massive effect on what's going to happen. And I say that because the ANC up until this point has been strutting around. They've been confident. They've been saying, we're just going to do X, Y, and Z. There's nothing you can do about it. We are still in power. We still have the power to do what we want. They were strutting around like the world belonged to them. And as I said, now that's completely been shattered. They're cowering in the corner. And I don't think they're going to have the confidence, at least in the short and medium term, to really go full in regards to what this act enables for them. And I think that at the very least, Donald Trump has bought us very valuable time in regards to that. It reminds me of the social experiment that I saw a while back, long ago, so they put a bowl of money next to the street that just says, take as much as you want. And then within like the first hour, all the money is gone. Then they do the same experiment again, same place, bowl of money, sign that says take as much as you want, but they put a poster up on top of the bowl that is just a poster of two big eyes watching the bowl. and then nobody takes any of the money. At the end of the day, the bowl was still full of money. Nobody was willing to take it. But the only factor was they put the psychological fear of you are being watched into the equation. And I truly believe that that psychological aspect is going to play into play a role in the future of what's going to happen with this bill or with this act. So we're very, very thankful for Donald Trump's intervention there. What's AfriForum going to do? Well, AfriForum has a multifaceted a strategy on how we're going to respond. And there's a lesson in there as well that I want to impart on Americans, but we'll get to that maybe at the end. So our strategy is multi-pronged. Firstly, we have a 3-point plan. Firstly, the first point is that the Expropriation Act has been signed by the president, but for it to be enacted, for it to be proclaimed, it has to be co-signed by the minister that has to turn it into action, that has to execute it. That minister is the Minister of Public Works, Dean McPherson, who is associated with the former opposition party, the Democratic Alliance. The Democratic Alliance rejects the expropriation bill, or at least in their rhetoric, they reject it. So AfriForum met with the minister and sent him a letter saying that, pressing him that he under no circumstances should co-sign the bill, which will put the the act's implementation in crisis. It's unknown what will happen then, but we'll see. The president will likely be then forced to fire the minister, but he will have been fired then on a matter of principle rather than signing a bill and legitimizing a bill that his party rejects. And if the DA's minister does sign that bill legitimizing it, it's a death sentence for that party, so they don't have pretty much have a lot of a choice. That's the one angle that we're going in at it, putting pressure on the minister to not co-sign the act. The second aspect is the legal aspect. As I said, AfriForum has a fight component to our strategy, and that is testing the bill, taking it to the High Court and testing its constitutionality, taking it all the way to the Constitutional Court, which is the South African version of the Supreme Court, if necessary. That's the other aspect. And then thirdly is the international pressure aspect, which Donald Trump has already played a massive role in. It's informing our network of contacts and allies in the abroad, how they can put pressure on the South African government, how they can help and how they can spread the word and how they can support us. That's the 3-point plan, but it's also not in isolation. That's just the Expropriation Act fight plan. Then there's the BUILD plan, where we all increasingly focus on creating state-proof solutions in our communities, following the philosophy of the hedgehog, or the porcupine philosophy, rather, where you make yourself as inedible as possible. You make your community as impenetrable as possible in as many facets as possible. And I think there lies one of the major lessons for Americans. It's that story of the guy in the bar fight. He's completely outnumbered. There's 10 guys. They say they're going to murder him. And then he says, fine, you can try and kill me, but one of you is going to lose your eyes. I'm going to poke out one of your eyes. And who of you is going to be willing to do that? And none of those 10 guys ganging up on him is willing to take a 10% chance or a 1 in 10 chance that they're going to be blinded at the end just to kill one guy, so they leave him alone. That's the porcupine approach of making yourself actually resistant to attack from the outside. That's why there are still porcupines in the Kruger National Park here in South Africa, the large nature reserve that has lions and leopards and any massive predator that you can imagine. But there's small porcupines are abundant because a porcupine spikes in South Africa. Go Google or look on YouTube, porcupine versus lion, or porcupine versus leopard, or badger versus leopard or lion. And it's an animal that thrives on the same principle of where the porcupine has spikes, the badger has a very, very, very thick skin that's impenetrable to even a predator's bite. So that's the way you survive, particularly as a minority when there are predators as big as the total state out there, is you make your community as inedible and as dangerous as possible through spikes or a thick skin. And there's many ways to do that. As I explained, many of the operations that AfriForum do are particularly to achieve this, specifically our nationwide security network that we've built. So, I mean, that's in the end the final lesson there that I think Americans can learn, and I've noticed this when I describe some of our solutions. Americans and Europeans, also Westerners in general, will zero in on one aspect of your strategy. For example, the legal strategy, and they'll say you're wasting your time. The courts are corrupt. The courts will never help you in any way. Why are you doing this? Because you have to. The answer is you have to use every single avenue and every single opportunity at your disposal. Yes, ideology has infected many of South Africa's courts, but they're far from useless. AfriForum have won many court cases to stop destructive policies from the ANC, and that's the reason why we're taking this to court as well. Doesn't mean we're putting all of our eggs in that one basket. If that strategy fails, there's 5 other strategies and tactics we're also employing at the same time. It's the metaphor of the military. I mean, the military is not just made out, you don't win a war just with infantry. Infantry are a powerful tool in your arsenal, but you also have a navy, you have an air force, you have a mechanized unit, you have artillery, you have all these different units that act in tandem, all serving a particular role in your strategy. I mean, it's you that always talks about you have to capture castles. I always talk about you have to dig trenches. Well, that doesn't mean you just have to dig trenches or capture castles. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can capture castles, dig trenches, bombard your enemy's positions. There's many different strategies and tactics that you can use, and you should be using them at the same time, because if you use them in tandem, they start dovetailing and start complementing each other. And when they do that, they start enhancing and elevating each other to a point where, when they are in sync, they are much more powerful as a sum together than as any one individual part.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom there. You know, there are so many people who said it's impossible for anyone meaningful to get elected. And even if they get elected in the United States, they're never going to go after the deep state. They're never going to go after all these different agencies. They're never going to dismantle the leftist patronage networks and indoctrination and all of this stuff. And the chance was always there. So the answer was always, you work on the national level, yes, but you also work on the local level, right? Because it's great now that this thing that would never happen, that will never get anybody who's going to do that stuff, that it is happening now, that avenue did, at least to some degree, seem to bear fruit. But you never rely entirely on that. You assume that at some point, you know, that might not work, or Trump might not get it all done, or there's some aspect of that won't be complete. And you still need to do the work at the community and the state level. You still need to strengthen your, your community, the ability of your state to resist, all your local governments, sheriffs, all these things. They need to be ready anyway. And so you should use this moment with Trump in the United States as a moment to secure castles, build, dig trenches, build more, fight, like you said, have a fight and a build strategy simultaneously. Don't leave it to just one or the other. But it is funny how, the people who constantly complain that nothing ever happens and nothing's ever going to win and there's no victory in sight and there's no way you can overcome these things. Well, those people are still sitting around complaining online, and the people who are building and the people who are working and the people who were, yes, not buying into everything, not drinking the Kool-Aid, not worshiping any individual, but were actively taking the opportunities that were available to them, they're the ones that are going to succeed. And as you're saying, in South Africa, no different, right? You're pushing on multiple avenues. Where you get a victory, fantastic. Where you don't, you just redirect to one of the other tactics. The important thing is that you're working. The important thing is that you are planning to make a difference, and that you are willing to apply across so many domains the resistance necessary to protect you, your community, your people, and everything else involved there. So I think that is really important for people to take away. And of course, I hope, I don't want the United States, militarily or financially involving itself in other nations, but to the extent that Donald Trump can bring a light to what's happening, obviously Elon Musk, being a South African himself, also very aware of the dynamics and play there, the more that they can bring to light what's happening there and assist you guys in any diplomatic way or media relations way possible, I think that's excellent. I'm glad that that's something that they can contribute. For anybody, we got a few questions of the people here real quick. For anybody who wants to follow your work or know more about AfriForum, is there anywhere you want to direct them?
So I think most of your subscribers might have seen me on your show before, so they will know that I post under Conscious Caracal on X or on YouTube. On YouTube, I just interview interesting people, both from South Africa and abroad, about topics that I think are both relevant to South Africa and the wider West. I don't really do current events on my channel. I talk about more lessons for the future and strategy and tactics. And on X, I comment on what's happening in South Africa, sometimes on what's happening abroad. And if you want to support AfriForum, I know there's Auron put a link in the description. You can become an international member of AfriForum. That's a new feature that we just added recently. And or you can make a once-off donation. Because the dollar is so much stronger than the rand, our currency. Don't tell yourself, but well, what can my little small donation do? Your small dollar donation goes a very long way in South Africa. When it comes to international support, there's still so AfriForum doesn't even get 1% fraction of our financing from international support. We get all of it from our membership base in South Africa, but we've just now added this new feature where you can become an international supporter as well. So you can follow that link in the description for that. Just wanted to add there quickly, Auron, when you were talking about there how the battlefield works, there is one lesson that we learned from the ANC that was very valuable, and that is the concept of the balance of forces, as they call it. They learned it from the Soviets, and they still use it today. The balance of forces is actually, it sounds very theoretical, but it's actually quite simple. The balance of forces dictates that before you make any decision, you take into account what the weight of the different forces, the different pieces on the board are. And if they are in your favor, you move forward. If they are not, you regroup, you readjust, and then you do the calculation again. And the lesson there that's so important is the fact that you need to constantly be working to increase your weight on the board, to increase the power of your little chess piece on the board. Because the other chess pieces or the other pieces on the board, you can rest assured are fighting to increase their weight on the board in that balance of forces. And the best way to influence reality is to constantly use from every angle at your disposal, build up that center of power, build up that weight on the board. And the more your value in the balance of forces, the more you can get done. So that outlook, I mean, we're applying that lesson that we learned from the ANC in our own politics as well. If you're still too small to make a difference, well, then you better start thinking about what are some of the basic things that I can start doing, or my organization can start doing, or my community can start doing to increase our resilience and to increase our hitting power, or our just power in general, in the larger game. Don't just write it off. Don't just write off, say, well, I'm too small to make any type of difference. All the big players on the board started off small and started accumulating power, and it is really a snowball effect.
Yeah, the best political victory, the only real political victory, is the one that makes the next victory easier. And
Absolutely.
so by even if you have to start in a small way, if you don't think you're going to make any difference, finding a way to make the next victory easier, to accumulate enough power so the next victory rolls, like you said, it creates that snowball effect, and that's definitely key to any form of activism. All right, well, let's go over to our questions from the people real quick. Lowbrow here says, how did you manage to find such a smart guy with a mustache that would make a Free State traffic cop jealous? And then I can't pronounce that, I'm sure.
He says that last word is sterkte Rooikat. It just means all the best to you, Caracal.
Excellent. All right. Well, there you go. Let's see here. Mana Yud Susha says, in a war to impose global Zimbabwe, we are all Rhodesians now. And then we have Lowbrow again, and he says, when this is all over and we have won, I would love to see Auron chat with Ernst Roets of AfriForum about metal. Till then, check out some Windai Wolf.
Yeah, so that's my colleague Ernst Roets. He is also part of the Solidarity Movement. Dr. Ernst Roets, even though he will never introduce himself as such. I mean, he's a senior figure within the solidarity movement. He was from AfriForum, but I mean, he's still my colleague, seeing he's still in the same constellation of organizations. He just got a massive promotion, but he's also a metalhead, and he also has his own metal band called Soms Wen die Wolf, that translates to Sometimes the Wolf Wins, and their music is free, and you can find it on YouTube.
Oh, nice. Yeah, no, he was. I met him, I believe, with you at NatCon,
he was at
right?
NatCon with me, yes.
Oh man, we could have had the metal discussion, and we didn't. What a shame.
But I will make sure you have his contact details so you can chat to him. Maybe you can talk about African politics for 45 minutes and then 15 minutes of metal talk.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the first time I've pulled that trick. It's a metal discussion thinly veiled in the guise of political theory. Then let's see here. We've got Robert Weinsfeld says MZRA and a shout out to the American Tribune. I'm not sure. Do you have any context for that one? No? All right. You translated the last few messages, so I didn't know if you would know more about that one.
I don't have a context for MZRA, no.
Yeah, I didn't either. Yeah, the American Tribune is an outlet online, but I don't know about the MZRA. But thank you very much, Robert. And then we've got Broman Hank, which, again, I believe is something in Afrikaner there.
Yeah, he says, yes, very nice. Yes, very nice. How is it going with you?
All right, see, they could all be saying terrible things, and you could just be being very nice to me and protecting me from
they're being very nice and cool.
Okay, I don't. The South Africans could have joined to troll me. Who knows? So all right, guys. Well, we're gonna go ahead and wrap this up. But of course, like I said, if you are not familiar with AfriForum or Ernst's work, you should most definitely check those out. Like I said, if for no other reason than just the on the ground experience of building. Is really critical. Again, I'm glad that Trump is doing good things. I'm excited that he's extending his influence, not just in the United States, but places like South Africa in a positive way. But ultimately, we cannot rely on the idea that Trump himself will fix everything. We need stronger communities. We need stronger localities. We need stronger states. And South Africa gives you a roadmap for how to do that in the harshest climates. So if you have something that isn't as harsh, it should be easier to get it done, right? And that's a great way to study and understand what's working there and what can be applied in the United States or your nation if you're living somewhere else. If this is your first time on the channel, of course, you should subscribe on YouTube, click the bell, notifications, all that stuff. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, which Ernst has talked about a couple times here, you can get it in both print and now in audiobook format. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.